Welcome to A Case of the Mondays, a podcast by 3R Strategy where we talk about some of the most pressing issues facing HR professionals and business leaders. From fair treatment of employees to fostering transparency in the workplace, we'll explore how to create an environment where people don't just have to come to work, but want to. So, if you're feeling blue, tune in and join the conversation so you don't end up with a case of the Mondays.
Hi everyone. Welcome to A Case of the Mondays, a podcast by 3R Strategy. My name is Rameez, author of A Case of the Mondays, How to Build a Culture of Trust Through Pay Transparency. Today is our first episode and we're discussing why men and women don't get paid the same salary in sport. Today I'm joined by my colleagues Tracey Hodgson and Jenna Thompson. But before I go into asking the first question, how are you guys feeling about our third podcast, and can you introduce yourselves?
Hello, I'm Jenna. I'm a Reward Comms Manager at 3R Strategy, and I'm just thrilled. No, I am excited. I don't know, full disclosure, don't know a lot about football, but do have some thoughts on whether men and women should be paid the same in football.
Hi, I'm Tracey Hodgson. I'm a Senior Reward Consultant at 3R Strategy. I'm excited to see where this podcast goes. Bit apprehensive, but excited at the same time. And with regards to the topic, it's a mixed bag of thoughts, really. I think there's a few layers to uncover on the topic.
Okay. So I think before we start, just for anyone, hopefully many people listening, the concept of equal pay as set out in the Equality Act of 2010 says that men and women should be paid the same if they are doing like work of equal value, or work rated as equivalent. And essentially it's around ensuring that there's no discrimination, and if people are doing the same job, they should be paid the same. But that's the concept in organizations. But should it be the same in sport? A 2021 BBC study found that 90% of sport pay equally to men and women at major championships. But the biggest gap was in football, golf and basketball. So, Tracey, let's start with you. Why do you think there's such a big gap in these sports, and is it justified?
So I think with football, golf, basketball, they are very commercialised. They're on TV all the time. If you're at my mum's house anyway, golf on all the time. And so that means there must be a lot of money coming in to those sports from branding deals, TV deals. So I think that's the difference between those sports and some of the other sports into the reason why they say that they do different pay for men and women.
I have to say I find golf really boring, so I'm not going over to your mum's house.
Don't think she wants it on.
Jenna, what are your views around these three sports, and why there's a big gap?
Those three, well, so I think it comes down to three things, doesn't it? It comes down to the difference in revenue that men and women's football, basketball, golf is bringing in, and then linked to that is the lack of investment in the women's teams for those sports. And then there's the historical inequalities in those sports. So for instance, football used to be a men's only game. Like when football first came about, women weren't allowed to play it. It happened much later that women were allowed to play it, and then there was a lot of institutional backlash. I don't think FIFA even really acknowledged women's football until the early 90s. So I think those are the main reasons why that's still an issue now.
So I guess that's a historical issue, and that's why there's been lack of investment in women's football. But as things stand, and if you have a significant amount of revenue coming in from the men's game, and hence there's a pool of money to pay the players, and there's a much smaller pool of money in the women's game, do you think that's a justification?
I don't think it is justified, because I think the men's teams were given like a big advantage early on by being given literally all of the opportunity, and that women weren't allowed to play for like a long time. So I don't think it's justified that now they earn more, because of course it brings in more revenue now because it's had like so much more support and funding. So I think there needs to be some levelling out in order for that to be fair. Like, if we expect organisations to pay men and women equally, I don't see why it should be any different in sport. And if it is, like, what kind of message is that sending about the value of women in sport?
So I think what we are seeing is when players, so for England, for example, the FA pays the women and the men the same fees for playing in a match. So those associations are trying to level the playing field. It's the prize money that's then for like the World Cup, FIFA, is it? UEFA? I don't know. I don't know the difference between UEFA and FIFA. They're two big organisations who are deciding.
UEFA is European.
Ah, there we go. This is the height of my knowledge. Yeah. So it's those organisations that are deciding, this is the pot of money that we're going to give out to the women's teams and the women's tournament versus the men's tournament. But I was looking at something, and with the World Cup and the television rights, the men's and women's television rights are actually sold as one package. So how can they say, the men's has generated this and the women's has generated that, because it's sold as one package?
Yeah, I think there was, I think it might have been Fox News. Somebody communicated something around the men's game bringing in a lot more money. But yes,
Fox News to have an agenda.
Yeah. To be fair, I think it was just one journalist who got the numbers wrong or made them up. But they are. They do bid for the rights for the men's and the women's game jointly. So there isn't really, even if there is more revenue coming from one side, there is no way to differentiate the two the games. So I think that when it comes to organizations like the FA or UEFA, they're non-profit organizations. Well, the FA is, and so their objective is to advance the game, and they should have the same pay for both men and women, because it's not really a commercial arrangement. But when you look at players playing for a club, that's more like an organization. So if you have one organization that is, bringing in £1 million revenue, and another organization or a club bringing in £100,000 of revenue, then clearly they can't pay both sets of players the same amount, because it's not the same organization. So it will be like Google paying much higher salaries than a startup technology organization because of the funds that they have. And so the question is, how do we get from a place where the women's teams are on par with the Googles, which is the men's game? Because until you get to that place, where would the money come from to have equal pay?
It's just so vastly different. So for the Women's Super League in the UK, the average wage is 47k. The average figure for Premier League is 100 times that. So it's a big gap to bridge. And I think it can be reduced, but I think there's also the whole debate of the salaries in football are just ridiculous. So
sorry, that number that you mentioned, 47k, that's annually, right?
Yeah. Whereas that's probably what Harry Kane gets paid in a week. Yeah. Or maybe he gets more than that.
He gets paid a week.
No, I was thinking that actually. I think I saw something where the highest paid lady is something on like 200k a year, and that's what he gets paid in a week. I think that's what I saw somewhere.
Yeah.
I saw that
So-
article as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I mean, there's
yes.
no way that someone is like 200 times better at football.
Yeah, and it's not about someone being better. It's not about them being better. It's not like saying he is better than she is. They are two different organisations, as it were. They're two different revenues behind what goes into paying those wages.
Yeah, I think the question of who's better than somebody else, you can also look at that within the same team, right? So if
Yeah.
you've got a Ronaldo getting paid £500,000 a week, and you've got somebody else who's also a striker and getting paid £80,000 a week, they're doing exactly the same job. So I think in that sense, it's not exactly comparable to an organization where you can have that differential, and that differential is justified through things like merchandising, through sponsorship deals. So as an example, when clubs spend £40 million on a player, if that player has a huge following, sometimes they make up that money within a number of weeks just through shirt sales. And the question is, there's a justification for that high salary and the fee that they're paying. And there's no way that they could pay the same amount of money to a female player that just doesn't have the same profile. So how do you bridge that gap without either subsidizing the women's game from the men's game? And if so, it would be like, would Google subsidize a startup and say, we're going to pay our employees a lower salary so that a startup can get a higher salary? That just wouldn't happen. So why should that happen in football?
Well, I think it goes back to what Jenna was saying about there's so many years behind in the investment that it's a cultural change. In some countries, women's football is more popular than men's. Well, soccer is more popular than the men's, but in England, in Europe, the men's game is seen as superior, and until that thought and bias is, I don't know.
What do you mean by
neutralised a bit.
superior?
So I hear men going, "Oh, well, the women's game's too slow, or it's not as skilled," and I'm like, whatever. You're still trying to get a ball in the goal more times than the other team. It's still the same game.
Yeah, it's just trying to get a ball and a goal, isn't it?
Yeah. At the end of the day, sorry guys.
Sorry, guys, but at the end of the day,
Well, I will get the male perspective and a football fan perspective in, because I would say there is a big difference, and it can be down to the fact that yes, there was no investment, and so when you look at the men, they are they're training from the age of 6 and 7, and so they're highly skilled because this is a full-time job for them. And when you're on the salary that the women are on, it's not a full-time job. It's actually something you do on the side. And so they're not going to reach the same skill level. And I think that also then explains why you would have 90,000 people or 70,000 people every single week going to see the men's game, because it is highly skilled and it's more entertaining. But you don't have the same number of people going to watch the women's game. But that's also another point, is if a lot of the people who are saying that they should be equal pay, should some of them be making some sort of contribution, either watching the game, buying merchandising, supporting the companies that are sponsoring the women's game, and so on? Because if not, whose responsibility is it to make sure that there is equity, or that equity is reached?
I don't think it's the responsibility of individuals. I think there's too much fixation on the responsibility of individuals to make massive changes like this, and I think it needs to come from the organisations and the institutions that are like behind football, personally.
Yeah, but how does that happen?
Well, I think it is happening. I think the starts of it are happening. So we're definitely seeing more of it talked about, more of it on television. I mean, I turned on TV at the weekend, saw women's rugby. I've never seen women's rugby on TV before. Yes, I've not gone looking for it, but but the access to get to the football games is improving. They're bringing some of the United games, women's games, to Trafford Park before they were played over in Leigh. So again, if you start bringing them to Trafford Park, then that's going to generate more interest as well. And I think it's the investment in the kids as well. Like you see, I'm from Blackburn. You see Blackburn Rovers putting a lot of investment into children's football and heavily into girls being involved in that.
So, I mean, we have. I agree. So we have a lot more games being shown on TV now. Women's games. There's a lot more investment in the international game as well. But Jenna, when you say that it should be the responsibility of the organizations, the organization is ultimately just made up of people as well. So what are they supposed to do to, other than making the investment which is now taking place? Is there anything else that they should be doing? Because, I mean, I'll give, so the example of, let's take it away from football. Let's look at singers. Whether somebody is a male singer or a female singer is dependent on how much revenue they bring in. So if somebody is singing inside Wembley Stadium with 90,000 fans, they're going to get paid a lot of money. And you can have a busker outside Wembley Stadium. It's not going to get paid anything. But they're doing the same job. So when does the Equality Act stop being relevant when two people are doing the same job but are not paid the same amount?
I don't know what that example is showing. That's down to an individual's talent and fan base, I guess. But saying that, probably only, I don't know, Spice Girl era onwards, a lot of time money wasn't even put into promoting women singers, female bands. So there was lack of investment in women in music industry as well. So obviously we've seen a lot of improvement in that now, but it goes back to the reason they weren't getting through and getting to the rank like the heights of Taylor Swift is now is because the businesses weren't putting the investment into those artists, and now they are. Look how well they're doing. So it does go back to corporations and investment.
But regardless of gender, so in that example of somebody inside Wembley Stadium, outside Wembley Stadium, the revenue is the same as, guess they're individuals, but it's the same concept as being a club. So somebody inside Wembley Stadium with that fan base and that revenue could be Manchester United, and somebody outside busking could be a women's team with no revenue or very little revenue. So isn't it the same concept of revenue reward and very little revenue, no fan base and no reward, regardless of gender?
In simplistic terms. But how does that busker then become Ed Sheeran? Investment.
Yeah, but I guess who is investing in that busker then?
Simon Cowell.
Is it also
Virgin?
So the people who are walking past that busker, should they not be making a donation, or should they not be giving money to that busker? Because
They can give that busker as much money as they want. That's not going to pay for Wembley. The kind of money and investment that it takes to get someone on the stage at Wembley is not really what you're going to earn from busking.
Yeah, I think I'm just trying to understand whose responsibility is it? Because I think it's easy for us to say it's the organization's responsibility. But we have to, if you look at it as an analogy of a large company or a small company, that's essentially what it is. It's not up to the large organizations to subsidize the smaller organizations, is it? Or are you saying it is?
Well, what about the
Yes.
governing bodies? I mean, sorry, I don't know anything about how football works. But I feel like it should be down to some sort of governing body, right, to like set rules across the board for all organisations in football. No? Yes? Like the government does with organisations here, like the government does with saying that you need to submit your gender pay gap or you need to ensure you have equal pay for equal work. There should be the same governing body setting the same rules in sport.
It is a governing body, but ultimately it's a commercial arrangement, right? Because each club is a commercial entity. And so you can have a governing body and setting some rules around reporting and what they should be doing, but ultimately it's a commercial arrangement. The revenue that they bring in, the sponsorships that they bring in. I think there is some impact of investment where if you get more games shown on TV, for example, for the women's game, it's going to attract more sponsorships and advertising. So that will definitely help. But I think it's very difficult to bridge the gap because the gap is so big. And, I was looking at the FA Cup final because I'm a Manchester United fan. And the women are playing Chelsea in the FA Cup final. And I was looking at ticket prices and it's £20, £30. And they actually encourage a lot of families to go together as well. But if I was to go and watch the men's game, I'd have to pay £100 for a ticket. And you wouldn't really get people paying £100 for the women's game to go and watch it. And so that's where I'm asking is there partly responsibility for people to make that investment or accepting that actually there is always going to be a gap unless people are willing to make that investment?
But I think what you're trying to say, I think what you're trying to say is not just the, I don't know, subsidies from so Man United will subsidise the women's club if it's not bringing in profit. But you're saying what should people be doing? But then I think that just goes back to culture and changing the culture in our country that sees women's and men's games as equal. So it has to come through the way we talk in the media, the way we talk about football, the way we interact with sponsorship deals, the way that we buy things. We have to show these organisations that it's worth investing in. But it has to be, it's a cultural change. Then just saying to an individual you have to do something, I think is hard.
Yeah, especially if there's a perception that the women's game is slow or less, what did you say, it's too slow or it's less skilled. So if that's true, then we need to help that to improve.
Yeah.
You can't just be like, everyone needs to go to the game so they can get better.
Yeah.
No one's going to do that. The organisations or whatever behind it needs to ensure that happens so that people want to go to the games.
Let's move away from football for a second, because if you think about tennis is a similar thing where the concept of equal pay for equal work, it was introduced for tennis quite a few years ago, where they had the same prize money for both men and women. So if we think about that in the context of football, where yes, there is a difference in skill level as well, but can we not get similar prize money?
I mean, that would be good. How did they do it in tennis? Can we take the same principle?
So I think part of the reason that it happens in tennis is because you don't really split up when the games are played. So if you go and watch a day of Wimbledon, you could watch 3 men's game and you could watch 2 women's matches on the same day. And so the crowd comes in and they're watching both sets of matches, and so the revenue for both those matches gets split. And so the prize money is divided as well. The only one that is sort of split is the final. So you usually have the women's final on the Saturday and the men's final on the Sunday. But otherwise, the matches take place at the same time. So I guess what you could do is if you could have the men's and the women's football matches take place on the same day. So you could maybe have a 12 o'clock kickoff for the women's match, and then 3 or 4 p.m. for the men's match. And you have the same ticket price. And that would be a way to get good investment into the game in the short run, so that you then have that investment and the training facilities. And then maybe once there is some equity, then you can split the games up again if it doesn't work, or you could keep it as it is. Well, this has been an interesting discussion. So I think what we're saying is, to summarize, there's clearly a lot of there are a lot of differences in revenue, viewership, merchandising, sponsorships between the men's and women's game. And I think that is a logical reason why there is a difference in pay for men and women at the moment. In the same way that if you had a salesperson in your organization and one salesperson was bringing in a huge amount of revenue, they would get paid a lot through sales incentives, for example. But maybe that person has had unfair advantage and lots of training to be a good salesperson, and the other people haven't. And so what we need is more investment in making sure that women have the same level of opportunity and training, so that they can, if they want, dedicate their career to becoming a footballer rather than a side job. Thanks, Jenna and Tracey. Any final words?
I think footballers are paid too much.
Yeah.
The men.
Male footballers.
I think male footballers are paid too much. That's how I feel about that.
Yeah. Well, we can all agree on that one. Thanks, everyone, and see you next time on episode 2 of A Case of the Mondays.